Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar that discusses freshwater ecosystem restoration today. We're very grateful to have received an overwhelming response with participants from all around the world and to conduct this, what I'm sure will be a very fascinating webinar under the aegis of All4ClimateItaly 2021. This webinar is a joint initiative by auctusESG and 2030 Water Resources Group World Bank, and it aims to shed light on low-cost interventions for freshwater restoration using local and indigenous knowledge from South Asia. This webinar will feature presentations and a panel discussion to identify replicable and scalable solutions, mitigate risks and challenges, and create incentives to raise capital. To give you a brief understanding of the hosting organizations, the 2030 Water Resources Group is a public-private civil society partnership hosted by the World Bank. The partnership supports country-level collaboration designed to unite diverse groups with a common interest in the sustainable management of water resources, with a mission to close the gap between water demand and supply by 2030. 2030 WRG works in countries across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. On the other hand, auctusESG is a global expert advisory firm in climate finance, ESG, climate risks and strategy, aimed at accelerating global sustainable finance and the climate transition. A young organization standing at the intersection of finance, investments, and sustainability. And for its expertise, auctusESG has been awarded marquee projects by international governments, multilaterals, and financial institutions in a very short span of time. Both 2030 WRG and auctusESG's mission is to drive the conversation on freshwater ecosystem restoration by really harnessing best practices emerging from local and indigenous knowledge today. And so on behalf of both organizations, I would like to warmly welcome each and every one of you for this webinar today. Few quick announcements before we begin. We have a very exciting lineup of speakers today, and so I'd like to request each and every speaker to please observe the prescribed time so we can get to hear from everybody. For participants, please send us your questions through the Q&A box on the screen in front of you, and the moderators will take those up accordingly. We will begin the webinar, as I said, with standalone presentations on interventions by organizations conducting on-ground projects, which will be followed by a panel discussion with finance and sustainability experts in South Asia. I would now like to invite Namita Vikas, founder and managing director of auctusESG, to give her welcome address. Namita brings with her over 30 years of diverse global experience in climate change strategy and sustainability across various sectors, including banking and technology. She has been instrumental in driving robust climate finance strategies and ESG frameworks in the financial services sector. Namita, please take it away.
Thank you, Simran, and good morning, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to all. May I also extend a very special welcome to all the speakers and panelists present here today, and of course the audience who's joined in from across the globe. I believe this session would serve as a knowledge base towards fueling finance for low cost and low input based freshwater ecosystem restoration. So as we know, freshwater ecosystems supply food, water, energy to billions of people around the world. It protects from drought and floods and provides a unique habitat for many plants and animals. These ecosystems range from mangroves shielding coasts against tsunamis, erosions, to inland lakes and rivers teeming with fish, and wetlands that filter and moderate water flows while storing vast amounts of carbon. Now, in spite of being such strong safeguards for mankind, human actions are degrading these freshwater ecosystems. Pollutions from chemicals, plastics, sewage, overfishing, over-extraction of water to irrigate crops, so on and so forth, or the adverse impacts on the wetlands that are being drained for agriculture, with about 80% lost globally over the last 300 years and 50% since the 1900s. I think we are overall in a situation where action is really required at a faster speed than what is happening at the moment. And we've seen how hot and dry summers have left Europe sweltering, accompanied by warm winters leading to a very steady kind of depletion of groundwater tables in considerable parts around the world. So the increasing intensity of pressures and their combined effects have pushed freshwater ecosystems almost closer to the tipping point, and maintaining the resilience and the productivity of these ecosystems, therefore, is essential for life forms and livelihoods to survive and thrive. So restoration is bringing an urgency for action, and this naturally needs financing, as I said, at speed and on priority. So there are growing awareness that water-related investments are central to resilience building and achieving targets set under the Paris Agreement. Yet financial resources, including from the private sector, have traditionally not been forthcoming. Additional investments needed to achieve safe, affordable drinking water, for that matter, is at about 1.7 trillion US dollars by 2030. And this itself is only a fraction of the total finance that is required for water infrastructure, which is estimated at over 6.7 trillion USD by 2030. So naturally, there's a clear lack of finance, but there are challenges. So if you look at what are the challenges that financing faces, one, I think public ownership of natural ecosystems and the positioning of water as a public good, which creates a perception of poor return on investment, makes it tough for private sector investors to invest in sectors like these. Structuring of innovative financing, credit enhancements, or concessional loans to mitigate the risks associated with investing in freshwater interventions is a tough ask. While a collaborative approach is a must for innovative financing, it remains a challenge to bring in suitable partners on a common platform, especially from the commercial finance segment, and to stitch together the financing structure. Then, of course, there's limited data on valuation of freshwater ecosystems that makes it so much difficult to assess the costs associated with financing restoration. Monetization of benefits accruing from freshwater supply has always been complex. Since there's a lack of a track record of impact measurement and monitoring data, this hinders financiers from assessing, again, the ROI, and therefore really keeps them out. And then, in emerging markets, we've seen that since water, for example, is treated as public good, making the public pay for water is a sensitive issue and also potentially political. In cases where tariffs have been imposed, the issue of non-revenue water has been magnified, and this restricts the overall ability to create a virtuous cash flow cycle from freshwater consumption, reducing the incentives for investors or for financiers to enter the segment. But nevertheless, in spite of all these challenges, there have been successful models that exist which are providing impactful solutions to financing. And the fact remains that every $1 US invested in the water sector generates economic returns of $4.3, making this a very, very attractive investment. Now, if we very quickly look at what are the kind of opportunities that are sitting by this sector. So water risks have the potential to be managed and mitigated, and we've seen that. Research has also shown that businesses that are well prepared to face water risks can outperform their competitors. From acting as a force that will differentiate competitors to the opportunities that arise from the huge multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure financing gaps, there are significant opportunities for financiers who are paying attention to water issues. The need is really to tap into these opportunities by structuring innovative financing mechanisms, looking at mechanisms that could leverage and maximize the market, and at the same time put in mitigants to reduce the risk. The significant prospects lies in leveraging the existing knowledge and tools naturally within the local and indigenous practices as the topic of today. And this would not only help reduce the socio-cultural barriers, but also ensure a holistic approach to freshwater ecosystem restoration. We've seen how projects that are based on local practices many a times may be smaller in size with shorter terms, and also account for lower technical complexities associated with these kind of projects, which advantages when you look at overall project dynamics. So I think, also one area is a systemic approach that is very much necessary, and this needs involvement. I think the key here is collaboration. This needs involvements of the governments, central banks, regulators, development financial institutions, the community level players, and local financial institutions that would all come together to deploy the capital and execute on projects that will deliver on the necessary impact that one is looking at. And we've seen how the right regulatory conditions have helped bring or evolve or create a market and bring in more investments into climate or nature conservation related projects, and that's really scaled up. So PPPs is one classic example, and there are many examples. So we're going to hear more from the lineup of speakers here today, and I think it's going to be an exciting next 1.5 hours for us. So back to you, Simran, and I'll stop here and then get into moderation a little later. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Namita. That was great. I think the one thing that you said, which I think is a good mantra to have for any type of ecosystem restoration, climate-based adaptation, is at speed and on priority. I think that's really important. So anyway, next, just move things along. Next, I'd like to invite Kavita Sachwani, State Program Coordinator at 2030 WRG, to set the context that will help guide the rest of the event today. Kavita is part of the global leadership team at 2030 WRG, and she is an expert in building multilateral stakeholder platforms, mobilizing the private sector, governments, civil societies, bilateral agencies, and development banks to collectively work on water security and climate resilience. Over to you, Kavita.
Thank you so much, Simran, and good afternoon and good morning, and a warm hello to all of you from 2030 Water Resources Group. Thank you, Simran, once again for the kind introduction. And thank you, Namita, for setting the broader context of freshwater restoration and highlighting the critical role of finance to tackle the challenges involved in scaling up such interventions. Indeed, freshwater ecosystems constitute a resource of intrinsic, unquantifiable economic, cultural, and scientific value to human life, and an essential component of the global water cycle, and they play a very key role in climate regulation. The interactions of physical, biological, and chemical components of a freshwater ecosystem as part of the natural infrastructure of the planet, such as soil, water, plants, and animals, enable it to perform many vital functions. For example, water storage. I think we all know this, but when you talk about all of them together, it's quite a bit. Water storage, groundwater recharge and discharge, storm protection and flood mitigation, drought buffering, water purification, retention of nutrients, and stabilization of local climate conditions. With global population expected to cross 9 billion by 2050, FAO data says that food production needs to increase by 70% globally by 2035, and by as much as 100% in developing countries. Freshwater for irrigation, which comprises about 70% of global freshwater withdrawal, becomes a critical topic in this context. The depletion of freshwater resources is already plaguing sustained crop growth. In India itself, a study by US academics said that the depletion of groundwater could reduce crop yields by 20% by 2025, and by as much as close to 70% in severely affected regions, a challenge exacerbated by the country's expected population growth. As such, the progressive loss of freshwater ecosystems needs to be stopped, and measures need to continue to be taken to conserve them on a war footing. And like Namita said, at speed and on priority. Globally and in India, efforts are being made to restore lost or degraded hydrological and biological functions of freshwater ecosystems, but that's not enough. We need to continuously raise the bar to improve practices on a significant scale as we all try to cope with the accelerating water crisis and the effects of climate change. I also want to stress on the importance of low-cost interventions based on local knowledge vis-a-vis relatively more expensive technologies procured from global scientific innovations. For instance, some countries have developed large-scale wastewater treatment units to convert fresh water fit for agriculture use. But these are more often than not expensive propositions, and hence visible mostly in the advanced nations of the global north. To scale up freshwater restoration towards agriculture use in the global south, it is imperative to identify and focus on low-cost interventions, which are often based on local knowledge and practices, and work on institutionalizing these for greater impact. The case studies of successful interventions that would be presented in a few minutes from now are mostly instances where freshwater is associated with agricultural and related applications. The Nature Conservancy, who's with us today, for example, is implementing a couple of projects in India using a community approach that involve on-ground efforts to restore critical components within freshwater ecosystems to provide several crucial ecosystem services such as flood mitigation, biodiversity, habitat provision, and cultural services in the long term. So one is nature-based restoration of a large urban lake in Chennai, and the other is a restoration of the Narmada River's riverside habitats, creating and implementing a scientific riparian restoration model, which is also community-led and aims to improve livelihoods and socio-cultural and ecological well-being. So our eminent and experienced speakers and panelists will talk more about these today. We have examples from the states of Maharashtra, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh in India, and also Bangladesh. Right from the ancient times when Istanbul, or Constantinople as it was then called, created the underground basilica cistern to capture fresh rainwater, which was then emulated elsewhere, there has been a focus to learn and replicate from local practices and knowledge. This is another feature of most of the case studies you would hear more on today. So without much ado, let me start by introducing our presenters for this session. I'm so happy to introduce a team full of life, vigorous and flourishing, just like healthy freshwater ecosystems, which are such vital components of our planet. I am happy to introduce our opening speaker, Shuchi Vora, from the Global Resilience Partnership. Shuchi is an engineer, a social scientist, and working with the Global Resilience Partnership on knowledge brokering and on climate and water resilience initiatives. She has a decade of work experience in freshwater conservation projects. Shuchi is a contributing author to the IPCC 6th Assessment Report, Working Group 2, Chapter 4 on water and adaptation. She will be presenting some solutions from her work at the Global Resilience Partnership and also the Nature Conservancy Trust, where she was prior to joining GRP. Shuchi, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Thanks, Kavita, for this generous and warm introduction. If you permit me, I should share screens and get directly into the presentation.
Please do.
Thank you so much. So I shall be talking about my work at GRP and TNC, where I was before this, and slightly sort of setting the context around water resilience for people and nature, because both of these roles that I have and had are sort of related in different ways. At GRP, we define resilience as the ability for people and places to persist, adapt, and transform in the face of shocks, uncertainty, and change. And we are a partnership of more than 60 partners, and we work across these 4 areas. We are housed at and hosted at the Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden, and we're a small secretariat of about 12 people. At the GRP, we recently worked on and released a joint statement with 31 other global diverse practitioners. This included practitioners and researchers from IUCN, TNC, AGWA, which is a group on water and adaptation, and so on and so forth, FAO and others. So here we basically identified 6 attributes to what a water resilient food system should look like, and what that means for a food system that can be resilient and can provide to communities, economies, and ecosystems in a rapidly changing world. Water resilience forms the bedrock of such food systems. So it was sort of a clarion call to the UN Food System Summit from our end, and I'm glad to say it's well received. And I shall delve into these 6 a little later. At GRP, we have, like I said, been working on the 4 areas: innovate, share, convene, and advance. Within the innovate area, we surface, scale, and accelerate innovations around resilience. And some of those that these are all our challenge partners. And some of those that come to mind that have demonstrated water resilient food systems are Farm Better, where they provide personalized advisories to farmers in the developing world; Mercy Corps, where they've created Sharia compliant credit systems for access to women farmers; Groundwater International, where they're working in the Sahel region of Africa on ecologically fragile drylands with agropastoral communities, so on and so forth. There's more details on all of this on the GRP website, and I shall not go into great detail because I want to spend some time on the TNC project that I worked on. So moving on to the project that I worked on at the Nature Conservancy, apart from the ones that Kavita mentioned in her introduction to the Nature Conservancy, there were a few projects that that I was leading at the Nature Conservancy, including one at Beed in Marathwada in the drought epicenter of India. In Pune, this was the Ghor River Basin, and then the Devnadi River Basin that I'm going to delve on a little deeper today. Devnadi is a 70-kilometer long river in Nashik. It's a very small river that covers just 65, 66 villages within this one block, Sinnar. Hugely drought hit. Nashik otherwise is not a drought hit district, but this block is hugely drought hit. While climate change does play a role by reducing the number of rainy days in this area, extensive human use of groundwater is a critical driver to that impact of droughts. One of the key reasons for competition between agriculture and ecosystems in this area has been that depletion of aquifers. And Devnadi is a groundwater fed river and has become dry because of the way groundwater has depleted in the region due to extensive human use. So we implemented something called the participatory groundwater and ecosystem management. This is not just nature-based solutions, but essentially a process and a paradigm that shifts the way of thinking of not just the communities, but also experts involved, including myself. And at this point, I'd like to acknowledge our partners while I was at TNC. So I would like to acknowledge TNC for allowing me to present this. But apart from that, I'd like to acknowledge IIT Bombay, Yuva Bitra, who are our key resource partners, Arid Communities and Technologies based out of Kutch, and Vanam Ecologics, who are a Pune-based ecosystems valuation and ecosystems mapping organization. So we worked with all of these partners to create this model of solutions and processes that provide resilience for both people and nature. So resilient food systems, resilient ecosystems, and resilient processes for people and resilient people, basically. How we did this was we worked on governance. We worked on polycentric governance systems through creating sub-level committees, strengthening existing village committees, federating them at the basin level and federating them further at the block level, connecting them vertically with government representatives, connecting them horizontally with each other, and creating this cadre of, most notably creating this cadre of Bhujal Jankars or groundwater knowledge keepers, who I'll delve into a little deeper when I talk about innovation and learning. But this group acted as the knowledge management and knowledge experts on groundwater in this region due to their capacities. So how did we get to this idea of Bhujal Jankars? Innovation and learning was the other bedrock, where we worked with these volunteers, community volunteers, to train them and learn from them what their ways of knowing were with respect to groundwater. So their understanding of geology as well as the hydrogeologist's understanding of geology was what we combined to create a module so that they could become experts on their spring shed. Now, how this changed their thought process was they were very familiar with the ridge to valley approach for watershed interventions, for implementing low-cost nature-based solutions, which was great. But what led to ineffectiveness was that often discharge zones were considered spots for implementing recharge interventions, which in effect led to destruction of that discharge zone. So what we shifted in their mindsets was including that additional layer of aquifers and behavior of aquifers. So that really changed how they started thinking. Improving diversity and redundancy through not just nature-based solutions directly for water, but also for vegetation through managing grasslands, improving diversity of vegetation, conserving microhabitats, so on and so forth. System preparedness was another very important part of our work, where we created a form of early warning systems where farmers not just could get hydrometeorological data that IIT was working with us with, but they also created their own localized understanding of how they would use water for their crops, and worked within the limits of the amount of water that was available for them. So rather than moving towards creating more storage, they moved towards managing their demand, and thus bridging that gap and preparing their system for future droughts. I'll deal with long-term thinking and embracing complexity together. Um, for both of these, this required a shift in mindsets. This required a change, a major change in the way we think about water. We think of the needs for water in the short term. We think of easy linear solutions, and we wanted to bring in a systems thinking approach to not just the communities, but also to our partners' work and to our own work. And what we did was we conducted a series of workshops with our partners, with local level decision makers, MLAs, um, and the communities. And these were multi-stakeholder workshops at the local level to create these models that provided the big picture to everybody present in the room. This connected agricultural productivity, livestock with vegetation, groundwater availability, and water demands. So all of this, all of our systems are connected, and that bigger picture really led to that systemic shift in the way people thought. So these 6 different attributes to how we were managing water there was really what I would term as the paradigm of participatory groundwater and ecosystem management. I will end there. I don't think I have time to talk about the challenges, but maybe we can deal with them later. That's it from my end. Thank you. And these are some of our partners at GRP, and I'd like to acknowledge all of them for being a part of our partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shuchi. Thank you for sharing that very inspiring example from Devnadi River in Maharashtra. I think particularly what appealed to me is how you catalyze resilient food systems, processes, and people, federating them at the basin and block level, and then creating this cadre of Bhujal Jankars. I think it really is so important, knowledge management and trying to build and institutionalize that. And also the shift in mindset and the point you made on, behavioral changes and the systems thinking approach. So thank you very much for your insights. We'll probably come back to you during the session. We now move on to Farhad Zamil. Farhad is the country director of Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture in Bangladesh since 2011. He is responsible for the overall leadership, strategic planning, and implementation management of country program portfolios. In 2020, Farhad received an honorary doctorate degree in business administration from the Commonwealth University for his long-standing leadership role in sustainable development. Farhad would be speaking to us on water efficient techniques and technologies that are being used to restore groundwater in the Barint Tract, which is a very famous area in Bangladesh, where they are where Syngenta is working in close coordination with the 2030 Water Resources Group and Coca-Cola. Over to you, Farhad.
Thank you, Kavita, for introducing me. So hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. Today, actually, in this session, I am going to share our experience in implementing an agri-water efficient project aiming to restore groundwater and enhance the agri-water productivity in one of the water scarce area that is called Barint Tract in Bangladesh. This project is designed and implemented with the coordination role of 2030 Water Resources Group and the financial support from the Coca-Cola Foundation. Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture is the technical partner of this project, and DASCO Foundation is our implementing partner. Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, it is a Swiss-based not-for-profit international knowledge-based development organization. All of our work is around climate smart, resilient agriculture and smallholder farming system improvement. So our presence in Bangladesh since 2011, and we are implementing several cutting-edge agriculture development projects, including transferring water technology and best utilization of water. So going to the next slide. So today, actually, I am presenting our experience and actually that technique and approach that we are follow to restore the groundwater. So as you know that Bangladesh is a small country in Southeast Asia and considered one of the climate vulnerable country of the world. And almost every year, actually, a large portion of land are inundated due to flood, tidal, cyclone, and excessive rainfall. On the other hand, in a small portion of the country, that is northwestern part of the country, that we actually popularly known as Baring Tract, that area actually 40 meters above the sea level, and extreme weather, extreme hot weather and frequent drought, actually those are the issues, and water is an issue for drinking. At the same time, it is a serious issue for actually for the farming system or crop production. So at this context, first actually we can see what is the agri-water scenario and farmer realization gap in that area. The context is that in Bangladesh, about 26 square kilometer of land area are flooded almost every year. Those are the mainly plain land and the middle and south part of the country. However, about 4,700 square kilometer of Baring Tract area, actually covering 5 districts, those area actually has been suffering for low rainfall and continuous degradation of ground level. That actually hampering the farming system very much. Rainfall is 2,200 millimeter. However, in Baring Tract, it is in 1992, it would actually drop up to 872 millimeter per year. So those are the issues. And in Bangladesh, mainly in Bangladesh, our water is fresh water and sweet water. And about 93% of our water actually we are using for keep the first previous slide. Keep on the previous slide. Okay, thank you. 93% of our water actually we are used for irrigation purpose. And in Bangladesh, rice is our main crop. It is our staple food. At the same time, it is political crop. And most of the farmers at least grow rice at least one time in a year. And our main cropping season is burro rice, actually irrigated rice. And 71 to 88% of actually area actually we need actually irrigation during that time. And we also estimated that 46% of increase agriculture water demand by 2030. This is the fact. So all this context seems that actually these are the issues actually that need to be addressed immediately. Otherwise, it will create some serious climate hazard in future in that particular area. On the other side, the farmers' realization in that part, they thought that actually water is available because they are getting water for their crop production, and not today it is, and not today it is a headache for water level depletion. Another thing, farmers always said that without standing water, it is difficult to get higher productivity from the rice. Another thing, actually, they don't think about the what will be go after 10 years. And another thing that they thought that actually their primary occupation is agriculture, and they have only limited options, rice or some other crops. So all this means that availability of groundwater was not perceived as a serious constraint by the farmers. So please go to the next slide. So people, agriculture and water are interrelated, multifaceted, at the same time very challenging to address the issues. So considering all the facts, actually we develop an approach, multi-dimensional approach in groundwater restoration model for the resilient in agriculture. So actually we considered the locally available resources, local context, and the local people and farmers, stakeholders actually who are associated with the thing. So we are in our project, actually we are bringing all those stakeholders together. And we did two things. One is actually we are not dramatically change anything. Rather, actually, we are changing a little so that actually farmer can adopt and practice. One is changing cropping pattern and cultivation technique. That is very close to the traditional practice. So what cropping pattern actually? First one actually we are trying to shift from more water loving crop like rice to less water loving crops. Locally available fruit. Actually, barring area is very much popular for producing very tasty mango. So actually, shifting from rice to less water loving fruit crops. Second one is rice to high value vegetable crops. So rice need 4,000 cubic meters of water for producing 1 kg of rice. However, compared to these are actually very less water loving. Second one, actually, we also trying to change the cultivation techniques introduced. So one is ultra high density plantation for orchard and soilless vegetable seedling. Those two things. And another thing that actually as rice is the main crop, so we keep introduce the water efficient technology in rice cultivation. So our aim is to produce more crop per drop and also the value per drop. And second one is for that actually we also introduce water efficient technology and business modeling. One is alternate wetting and drying technology for rice. Actually, that is very low cost and local technology, but it was not popular. Some many reasons because due to lack of the business modeling. So actually for this product, actually we develop a very right kind of relationship between the water service provider and the farmers. So this process actually farmer can reduce their water use in rice production. Second one is we develop locally customized deep irrigation systems for mango orchard and other orchard crops. And the third one is in Bangladesh, it was mainly the cash payment system in irrigation water supply. So we are trying to introduce the volumetric water service modeling with the pump water suppliers and Bangladesh, Borendo Multipurpose Development Authority. So going to the next slide. So these are the intervention that actually for this intervention actually we try to introduce and demonstrate appropriate locally available and affordable technologies. Second one is we try to we want to educate and aware the farmers, and third one link them to the markets, profitable market. And the fourth one actually we also engage all the stakeholders actually related to agriculture and water so that actually these will be more sustainable. So for this project, for the sustainability point of view and to address the very dynamic type of challenges, actually we develop with the coordination effort of 2030 water resource group. In our project area, we build Barind Agri Water multi-stakeholder platform. In that platform, actually, we engage all the associated stakeholders, including Borendo Multipurpose Development Authority, Ministry of Agriculture, University, Mango Research Institute, 2030 Water Resource Group, Bangladesh Water Partnership, many private sector partners, including Jain, local partners, actually market linkage partner, Farmers Hub, implementing partner, and Syngenta Foundation was the technical partner of this project. So actually, and for this all this coordinating effort, even we started project in 2018. But by this time already it is replicated by the many of the farmers. So go to the next slide. So I can share some of our results. So the thing is awareness and technology save groundwater extraction, efficient use of water in agriculture and increase income. And after starting this project, you see that 250 hectares of land replaced by vegetables from rice to vegetables. 300 hectares of mango orchard newly created, actually they replaced from the rice land to yam, and 67% of the farmers now adopting AWD. We established in our project area established 110 drip irrigation technology demonstration, ultra high density mango orchard, showcasing people or not only training, also showcasing people. So these farmers, demonstrated farmers, actually change maker of that community. And by this time, actually, we have saved 5.3 million metric tons of water. Yield has increased 15%. The project farmers' income increased almost 20%. And we reached already 20,000 farmers by this time. So through this project, actually, what actually encouraging for us, that auto replication. Many of the technology for this project, actually, we make this available locally. And the second one is, we can engage the farmers and other stakeholders and make those technologies available. And we develop the service providers. At the same time, we can link them to the market, and all in together, farmers are actually shift from traditional to modern farming system with less water loving farming systems. At the same time, actually, we can also communicate with the stakeholders that actually how water actually, what is the best possible way to restore or actually reduce the extraction of groundwater for agriculture farming. So this is a good example that actually, thank you very much, because you are giving me space to share our experience to the wider audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Farhad. I think your multi-dimensional approach in groundwater restoration model for resilience in agriculture is very interesting, and also it's interesting the point you made on changing little, so that farmers can align. And the points you made on cropping pattern and cultivation techniques, and also the points on more crop per drop and the value per drop. I think it resonates with a lot of us here. So I think we'll move to, thank you once again for your participation this afternoon. We'll move on to Swati Rendu Chintala. Swati is currently working as a system change associate scientist with the World Agroforestry CIFOR ICRAF. She has been associated with the Andhra Pradesh community managed natural farming program since the past 5 years, working as an integrator for the entire program. She has experience in working in scale programs, social mobilization, fundraising, communications, and system-wide transformation. Swati is going to share with us her thoughts on the immediate need of systemic land soil transformation, which are critically linked to freshwater resources through the work happening across Andhra Pradesh in natural farming. Swati, welcome on board, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Kavita ji, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone here. And also, I'm really a huge gratitude to invite and tell us and share the stories of the amazing work which is being done by farmers. So across Andhra Pradesh, I'll just share my screen and we'll take it over from there. So
sure.
Yeah, so rather than having an opening slide, I realized that maybe we'll start with this. We were in the middle of pandemic. We're still in the middle of a global pandemic, but something else happened in December 2020 in a district called West Godavari in Andhra Pradesh. What happened was that people was a huge lot of people started getting some symptoms of seizures. There was some, and they were getting vomiting, and they were having high fever, and doctors were not able to actually see what was the cause for it. Suddenly, villages after villages in the major town of West Godavari actually started suffering some symptoms, and it was happening across all age groups. Now, while we were in middle of a pandemic, this was something which came as an outburst of another kind of mysterious illness. What the preliminary studies showed was this sudden surge happened because of heavy metal contamination in the food that was being consumed, and the pesticides or insecticides in the groundwater and the drinking water systems. What this incidence? So there was a major media hype for a few weeks in Andhra Pradesh, where there was a lot of talk on how pesticides is really the water that we drink are getting contaminated. Right, and West Godavari is one of the hub of green revolution. The West Godavari is basically a Krishna Godavari belt, and they receive water from canals, and basically this water runs through agricultural fields, and then pesticides and chemicals get mixed, and this water is then supplied to the drinking water in major districts. Also, it was realized that not just drinking water, it was also found in packaged water, and it was also got affected. So this is my premise of what I want to speak about. Is this the future? Is this the future we're looking at in urban areas? Is this the future we're looking at, that our food, our water, and whatever is consumed is being affected because of the chemicals, because it is heavily laced? Is this the future we're talking about? So what we realize is that water cannot be, or drinking water, fresh water, any kind of systems cannot be looked in isolation. We have to actually address that there is a soil and water interconnection which is there, and we cannot ignore when we talk about water, soil, and we cannot ignore water when we talk about and we cannot ignore soils when we talk about water. So today I'm going to just present what we are doing with respect to addressing this on a systemic and a scale level in Andhra Pradesh through the Andhra Pradesh community managed natural farming model. It is very interesting to see that for the last 60-65 years, our narrative has revolved around excessive usage of chemicals and fertilizers, because the country transitioned in the mid 60s towards industrial-based agriculture models. And obviously, the need of this hour was then to increase the yield. It was the need was to support a growing population. 60 or 70 years later, we are talking about a paradigm shift today. You're talking about that the existing food systems are unsustainable. They are, and this one COVID, it took just one COVID and a worldwide lockdown to tell us that the food systems have broken. And this is because the unsustainability of the entire value chains. It's not just the production system. We are talking about food system from the place of production to the place of consumption. So we have seen it breaking down. So what is the solution? One of the major solution, and I think this is a growing movement across the world, is that of we need to mimic nature. We cannot move away from nature when we're talking about agriculture, when we're talking about ecosystems. So mimicking nature is the cause. You can name it anything. You can call it organic, regenerative. There is a lot of many terminologies. We are talking about natural farming here, which is basically talking about mimicking nature, talking about diversity. It is talking about minimal disturbance of soils. We are talking about integrating animals into farming systems. We're talking about the paradigm shift in how we look at agriculture. Initially, we thought that agriculture is done by men. Then we realized, no, that narrative has changed, that agriculture or farming is done by women. Women are the major farming. And then the narrative has now changed, that the actual farming is done by microbes. We are just facilitating the microbes in the soil. And that is what changed the entire outlook towards farming systems, where we are talking about ensuring how these microbes are actually increasing in the soil. And these and the non-negotiable part we're talking is that we need to move away from the industrial grade synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, we decide, because these were a solution which was provided when there was a necessity, but it cannot run in the long run to provide us and a growing population of 9 billion people by 2030, because it's something which is away from nature, which is something which is not able to feed a growing population. And right now, the current food ecosystems have completely been disrupted, because farmers, the yield has been affected, the cost of cultivation has gone up, farmers are moving away from agriculture. So these are multiple questions. There is suicides, we are talking about debt, we are talking about migration. So there are interconnected complexities that have arisen. We are trying to find solutions, and it is something like a winning coalitions, where I've heard 2 presentations before that. They've done amazing jobs, and this is a time for winning coalitions to actually find innovations which are related to each other, so that we'll be able to address these complex issues. So what is the solution? You can see on in the presentation itself, it says we are talking about increasing the number of, how do we facilitate this increasing of microbes in the soil? It can be in various stages. It is basically microbial seed coating, where we are talking about using local products, local available inputs, use them, and they themselves have that kind of quality to actually increase microbes. difference in what we're talking about natural farming and to traditional farming is when before the forefathers used to use cow dung or cow urine as fertilizers. Here we are talking that now the concoctions which are made in the field, they are inoculants. Inoculants is basically just like what a spoon of curd does to a warm milk for making curd, right? So it basically enhances the process of fermentation. It's the same kind of activities which is being done by cow dung, cow urine, and we have moved beyond these narratives, and we're talking about diversity of seeds, we're talking about intercropping, we are talking about keeping the soil covered throughout the year. And then there is a breakthrough that we have seen, and somebody has posed a question also in a question answer chat: how do we harness the water from the air? So this is some breakthrough that is happening in Andhra Pradesh, where we are also talking about not to be dependent on just rainy season for farming. Can we find innovations where the farmers can keep their land covered for 365 days a year? So these are certain questions that we're trying to address at a scale level, and let us see how it happens. So these slides are just a reference for everybody to understand what has been happening, and these itself also are an indication of how locally available products can be used to as input, rather than putting chemicals and industrial grade synthetic fertilizers. So we are talking about seed coating, we're talking about Jivamritam, Ghana Jivamritam, and also mixed all these traditional knowledge with science, and then incorporate them with the work with the community. So this is soil this is happening is Ghana Jivamritam, that is a solid inoculant which is in process. I'm not able, yeah. Second. So now this is how the soil microbes are increased with respect to liquid inoculants. Yeah. And then we are also talking about pest management through botanical extracts. We are talking about using Neemastram, Brahmastram, and the solutions are available with the community. We have to facilitate that kind of wisdom to come out and use multiple integrated pest management system, nutrition systems to integrate together and take it via the community. So what is the point we're trying to address? So we are saying that healthy soil, healthy water, healthy ecosystem, and healthy human life is all interconnected, and it is essential that we stop all of them in the narrative and look at it from an holistic system perspective, rather than finding solutions in isolation. So we are talking about improved biodiversity, we are talking about solving resilience. I think even the presentation before me also talked about climate smart agriculture system, where we are talking about how resilient the climate change and how and global warming, in that context, how resilient the crop can actually become. So while I have covered the what has to be done, how Andhra Pradesh is taking it, what we realize is that to take it, see, these all interventions were happening previously also, but these were happening in silos, because the biggest question that agroecology, organic farming, natural farming, we get majorly is, if it is so good, why it is not scaled up, why it has not become popular already, why it has not become a part of a movement? The reason is that we have always looked at the technology part, but we have overlooked the social capital, we have overlooked the human capital that is required, and that is the reason scaling of such innovations was always neglected. So you have to go to the community, you have to understand the social capital is must for any kind of scale level, systemic level transformation. You have to take it to the community, you have to give community the ownership, and that is the reason when we talk about the top down approach versus the bottom up approach, we have to transition towards the bottom up approach. And I'm sure these are well said and done, but Andhra Pradesh, it is an example of how it can be achieved. It's the largest agroecological program in the world right now. We are talking about 1 million farmers who are going to be enrolled this year. And talking on that level of scale, it requires a solid social capital that was generated because of the women self-help group movement that started two decades ago. So women self-help groups have taken that kind of ownership, that these in 2 decades they have seasoned to such a stage where they've moved beyond the credit and thrift mechanism and are now addressing changes in their livelihoods as well. And natural farming has been that one intervention which has changed the narrative as to how they look at livelihoods now. So taking this program to women self-help group and they steering them in their villages, it has been a breakthrough. Why? I'll tell you. When we started the program, we started with men. So which is basically all of us are so inbuilt that men are the ones who do farming. We realized that the scale was, while we invested resources and energies, we were not able to scale it up. When we actually approached the women self-help groups, so our rate of transformation went from arithmetic to geometric progression. Because what happens, the energy and resources required for transformation, it went to a geometric progression, because I'm able to reach self-help groups and 15 women at a time, as compared to going from one man farmer to another man farmer, and that itself changed the narrative. And it's very heartening to say, I'm sure Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, I'm sure Jamil sir will tell, and Southeast Asia has a good social transformation and a complex web of self-help groups of women and communities.
Swati, sorry to interject, but if you can quickly wrap up your slides. Yeah, we're running a little over time.
Yeah, sure. So we are basically talking about farmer to farmer dissemination, where we are saying that it is not an input intensive program, it is a knowledge intensive program, where until somebody like Swati going and telling a farmer to do the transition, it doesn't happen. It has to be a farmer who have themselves experienced the change. That is where the transformation, the real transformation takes place. So this is a program which is knowledge intensive in nature, and it's a learning based program. So this is the very, very useful slide. We are talking about handholding to communities and village for 5 to 7 years. And I would just take a minute and say that the kind of transformation is like an alcohol de-addiction. You have to have that handholding for 5 to 7 years, because there is a real case of them coming back to chemical farming. So it is the same, the analogy of an alcohol de-addiction is where we are talking about that even a farmer, a chemical farmer, to transition to a natural farmer, we take that kind of amount of time. Also there is a major a dialogue of saturation, that in order to transform one farmer, we have to transfer the entire village for one farmer to come to natural farming. So that is the reason we are talking about saturating across, and then saturating breadth and length of the program. So this is a slide where it just tells where we are today and where we want to reach. Right now, at this moment, we are talking about 750,000 farmers who are enrolled in the program. And by next year, we are going to reach 1 million farmers. And my last slide, which will be, I'll just leave it to you all, that we are talking about natural farming as a possible solution to drought-proof the earth. Can we achieve this? And somebody has posed a question, and I would like to address it, that yes, we can harness farmers in Andhra Pradesh. Lakh farmers today are doing it, and I'm sure that we'll be able to, if done in integration with the community, we'll be able to solve these issues. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Swati. Thank you for sharing that all-important nexus between soil and water contamination with that opening slide. Indeed, what we do to the soil, we do to ourselves. And tomorrow is Gandhi Jayanti, and I recall Mahatma Gandhiji's words that to forget how to dig the earth and tend the soil is to forget ourselves. So, I mean, this community should stand for what we stand on. And I mean, technology is important, but not to be overlooked by social or human capital, like you said. So let's move on to the next presentation. I invite Sandeep Jadhav. Sandeep is currently working with WOTR as director and has been associated with WOTR, the Watershed Organization Trust, for over 23 years now, and has close to 3 decades of experience of working with NGOs, governments, and the CSR sector. He has played a key role in the Indo-German Watershed Development Program in Maharashtra, which is one of the most successful watershed development programs in India and the world. Sandeep will be sharing his insights on a diversion-based irrigation underpinned by WOTR's experience in Odisha. Sandeep, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Kavita, for such an introduction. And I thank auctusESG for giving us the opportunity to present the case study from Odisha. Let me share the screen to begin with.
And if you could just make it as quickly as you can, if you can share your insights. We're running a little over time, Sandeep.
So I have only 5-6 slides to show.
Sure.
So
Thank you.
To the point. So I have taken this case study of diversion-based irrigation because I think this is a age-old mechanism that people in the tribal areas follow, specifically in the eastern part of country and Odisha in specific, where diverting the stream water or river water in the basically mountainous area for the irrigation purpose or for the drinking water purpose is a common phenomenon. It has been there from the several centuries altogether. Only thing is what has happened in between, like the unity among the people, the community which was actually handling such kind of things, when it broke or there were some irrigation systems that came in, that high-tech irrigation systems cropped in, this kind of stream-based irrigation mechanism is deteriorating, or sometimes it is already damaged. So before getting into this, system, I would like to just can you see the second slide?
Yeah.
So I will just go through this for the newcomers who may not have understanding of what WOTR does. We are actually in the 9 states of the country, where about 61 districts we have been working so far in the last 28 years. And about 3.8 million people we have reached so far through several programs and training programs in the watershed, natural resource management, climate resilient agriculture, climate change adaptation programs, and women empowerment. So if you talk of local knowledge, which is the subject of the discussion today, we began our work, as Kavita has mentioned, working with Indo-German partnership, where watershed was a key theme. We think that the local knowledge is the basic or the foundation of even the watershed development plan itself. For example, the tool that WOTR and other NGOs working in this particular sector developed, Participatory Net Plan, which brings the best out of the traditional knowledge and also gems it with the modern knowledge in the watershed scenario. And it's very site-specific and farmer-friendly, wherein the farmer family and then village leaders come together on a plot and then discuss what can be the options in terms of land uses. The land uses that I have shown in other picture, where you see the pasture lands, afforestation, crop cultivations, and wherein the treatments and the land use is discussed, and the old age practices of even selecting a particular species for afforestation. For example, even going for some kind of a mixed kind of a cropping or in situ conservation mechanisms. All those are incorporated in the net plan, and then it becomes a real plan which is executed and handled by the community. So I would say, like, overall in a watershed development plan, the local knowledge, the traditional knowledge matters a lot, because it has to be sustained, maintained by the community. Coming to this this diversion-based irrigation, and there are 2 ways. Normally in the traditional practices, it was like channel flow through gravity. Like they will put some kind of a obstacle across the stream, and then that water is diverted into a channel, which is carried towards the farms along the slope, and irrigation is practiced. So these are the channels normally when there are mountainous areas where this high highly eroded part of the lands are there, then they are not feasible. And that is why some of these systems were like defunct and not working. So you can see we put check dams, the cement dams, and as an obstacle to the stream, and then water is carried from this stream into a channel here. And nowadays we are getting into the channels which are basically concrete channels, instead of having such a like open channels which are not really guarded for the erosion purpose. And people used to use it for basically flooding the rice fields. And because there were no storages in the beginning, like in the initial sort of system, traditional system, there was no storage at all. So people used to irrigate the farms whenever there's a stream flowing. When there's a stream is not flowing after the rainy season, then it really doesn't is not very useful system. But what we did is like we also brought in the storage part into it, and also tried to minimize the seepage losses, percolation losses, and try to get into the more what is it system which has got additional components of modern technologies. So now you can see the some sort of storage here, and then also carried to a big tank here, and then it is again piped. So now this is a piped flow system wherein losses are minimal or almost zero, and people get water in the farms with the pressure that is required. Sometimes you can also utilize some micro irrigation systems under this pressure and this kind of a pressure. So what we have done is basically use the traditional knowledge of diverting water, but also added the modern part into this, wherein losses have been reduced. And these have been done in a terrain like this. You can see the Google map here, where the top portion, the first stoppage of water, the obstruction is this one, and then it comes down to this place where the second stop is there, where the tanks are there, and there are outlets at these different places. So you will see all this area will be irrigated. This area will be irrigated, and then catchment area comes from all this topmost area. So basically, you will see there are different components which are added from our own design mechanism, and it has been implemented. So what we have done so far is like about 11 systems have been implemented in Raigada district and Ganjam district, and about 271 farmers have been benefited so far. So with this particular systems, we could actually irrigate about 343 acres of land, cropped area basically, and the benefits are very like what to say visible in terms of irrigation security for the Kharif crops, and these crops are mainly paddy and other pigeon pea crops. So like this year there was a dry spell of about 27 days in Gunupur block of Raigada district, wherein these people where these DBIs were implemented, they could still have a paddy crop standing and withstanding the dry spells because there was irrigation facility. So that helps a lot in terms of increased productivity of the paddy and other crops. You will see that because there's a security of water beyond even Kharif season, because there's a storage out there, people are getting into Rabi crops as well as summer crops, which are like short duration crops, which provide them some sort of income source as well. And some sort of food security and some nutritional aspect also can be taken care of by diversifying the crop system. So crop diversification is one of the benefit. Of course, because there is no lapse in terms of irrigation facilities, the crop productivity is also enhanced, and it sometimes goes to 1.3 or 1.5 times than the rain-fed crops. And the most important part is group farming. Now people are again coming together, which was like there in the beginning, in some decades back, it was there. And now people are again coming together and tapping the sources and trying to make collective decision making on how do they use this particular resource, and how do they come together for the input procurement as well as output marketing as a collectivization. So that is the best output out of this kind of an intervention. And we have actually tracked the income of these specific farmers, and we could see that over a period of 1 year, people could actually hike their income by 1.5 times, sometimes double the income. And for these particular projects, these systems, we could get support from an NGO called Bread for the World from Germany, and the CSR team from IndusInd Bank Limited, Mumbai. And that's it from my side. Thank you.
Sure.
Question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sandeep, for sharing the Odisha model of diversion-based irrigation, and that local knowledge is the basis for watershed development, which WOTR has been working on for the last 3 decades. Thank you so much. We now move over to Smita Singhal. Smita is the founder of and director of Absolute Water, India's first ever 100% green and organic water recovery system, converting sewage into potable drinking water without the use of chemicals and RO systems. Her work has been adopted by several Indian government agencies across India, and she has over 18 plants running under her belt, treating 8 million liters of sewage, where over a population of over 6 to 8 lakh people currently have access to safe and clean water for multiple usages. She would be covering a case study of a pond rejuvenation project in Gurgaon. Smita, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm always like, when I get scared when I'm always the last person to speak. I hope everybody's awake and listening. Good evening, everybody. So we have a technology that basically, like as Kavita said, we convert raw sewage or effluent of certain kinds of organic industry, which is basically the food industry, the sugar industry, textiles, food production, dairy farming. We do all of that, and we convert that into potable quality water, which is without the use of chemicals or without the use of an RO. It also creates no sludge whatsoever, and it also has no smell, and it has no odor, it has no noise. And what we basically use is vermifiltration with the mix of organic and inorganic media. And basically that's why we call it 100% natural. So how I would like to start is, and I will try my best to complete this at the given time, is that while the public is concerned about health risks in the use of wastewater, farmers also consider it long-term, has also considered their long-term effects on the quality and the health of their soil. Over 80% wastewater is released as untreated, as we know, into the environment. Cleaning that water and recycling it for use in agriculture could cut down on pollution of lakes and streams and slow the rate of which food production depletes groundwater or fresh water. The nutrients in partially treated wastewater can also nourish the plants and diminishing the need for fertilizers. Now, what I call the yuck factor, eating a green bed of lettuce grown with recycled wastewater might trigger a concern or even create a disgust response, which I call the yuck factor. But unsurprisingly, the yuck factor is actually less of an issue for farmers during the times of drought. Economics can overcome the yuck factor of most farmers is because they are willing to pay for reclaimed or recycled water, especially if it costs half the price of fresh water, which it can. Education and awareness through all the panelists that I've heard here today, and the whole agenda of this entire bit is that it can actually help educate people to understand how to not extract groundwater. Untreated or partially treated water presents definitely a clear health risk, where metals and salts and pathogens can build up in the soil, therefore changing its properties and the soil conditions such as pH levels, and that affects soil growth. Like for example, Israel accounts for 40% of recycled water for irrigation. California, which is drought-ridden and arid, uses 37% of recycled water for agriculture. The main challenge in using wastewater for irrigation is to shift from informal, unplanned uses to planned uses. And that is where I'm going to start giving my presentation on the pond rejuvenation project. If you could go to the next slide, please. Where the basic problem was the increasing groundwater depletion in Gurgaon. And Gurgaon is a huge, a financial and technology hub. In terms of urbanization, it has been the quickest growth ever. Real estate, population, you name it, that is why it's part even for the Delhi NCR. The groundwater depletion rate is also the highest, and the water currently is the entire dependency of groundwater is either on buying water from water tankers or being dependent on the municipal supply, which again has a problem because there is no groundwater, and of course when they rainwater harvesting. But it's unable to meet the demands of rapid urbanization as well as the agricultural land around it. The day zero for that is fast approaching, and experts have said that by 2022, it will pretty much happen if they don't do something now. So, which is why the Haryana government had formulated this kind of an agency called Guru Dal. It is basically between the Haryana government and that of the Gurgaon Municipal Department. And they had hosted a wastewater treatment expo where it was under something called Support a Pond. It was an intervention where they wanted 230 ponds to be revived and become a perennial source of fresh water so that the groundwater goes up. The next slide, please. So this was the project that we got, and we got selected for this. The location is this Hassan Pond, as you can see. This is the before picture of what it used to look like. We had the pond area is about 4.5 acres. The depth of the pond is just about 9 feet. The population that lives around this pond is about 10,000 plus people. Households are about 1,723. We were chosen to basically put up a plant which was between 250,000 liters to 500,000 liters of water. The problem here was, as you can see, was the partially untreated sewage and industrial effluent that was getting poured into this pond. Therefore, obviously, deterioration of surface and groundwater. It was a low-lying waterlogged area with obviously with sewage. And when excess rainfall, when excess water of rainfall, it used to obviously result in sewage overflow that used to go into the households living around there and leaching pollutants into the groundwater. Next slide, please. So this is where we came in, which is the Absolute Water Private Limited's vermifilter technology, which is a modern and 100% green technology, which replaced the old system of the septic tank. Dramatically, which improved the quality and quantity of water available for agriculture downstream, for the area around it, for the population area around it, for multiple uses. And now it has become the cleanest water in replacing the freshwater demands. So almost 70 to 80% of the freshwater demands have been substituted by this water that is being treated out of our plants. Now, the distinct advantages of our scheme, of our system, is that it is a naturally 100% green process. It has beneficial microbes, and what we use, earthworms, which is how vermifilter comes in, is basically break down the organic waste present in the sewage, and their entire sustenance is the pathogens and bacteria that come out of the sewage water. It harnesses the energy, carbon, and other elements present in the water and converts them into energy-rich humus and biofertilizer. This happens because we have 5 layers of media, which is the wood chips, we have the earthworms, we have gravel, we have sand. So this is the first level of filtration. And this water level of filtration in itself works very well for agriculture, for groundwater rejuvenation, river water rejuvenation, and for just bringing groundwater up. Then what we do is, and of course, because it is done in a completely natural way, where we imitate nature, so to speak, is it becomes nutrient-rich water, and we make water the vitamin and mineral content of water is as it would naturally be. Like I said, there is no odor, and we're one of the only few biological processes, or the vermifilters as we call it, that do not create any sludge. So the sludge itself, which normally carries a lot of the chemicals from wastewater, is not leaching into underground, and it is not polluting it further, and kind of going back into the process. Again, it is we use it on solar power because it's very low power requirement. You literally need just 4 kilowatts of water, 4 kilowatts of power to recycle 100,000 liters of sewage every day, 24 hours a day.
Smita, I hate to interject you, but if you can wrap up in a couple of minutes, that would be great. We're running a little behind schedule. I literally need 3 more
minutes.
Sure, yeah. Great.
The system can be tailor-made to suit site conditions because we have 3 different kinds of units. We have a modular unit, we have a mobile unit, and we have a civil-based unit, which kind of addresses to all the space constraints that kind of lends itself to. It is a plug and play. It's easy installation. It does not need skilled labor, so it is unskilled labor. When someone earlier was talking about public ownership, it lends itself to that. Of course, it is cost effective. It is a high return on investment. It literally 2 years pays for itself, and it's a noise-free system, and there is no odor. And of course, sustainable organic farming, because the when we change the media, it becomes into a very high, potently high, good quality soil conditioner. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is the after effects of the cleaning, and what the water is being used for is not just for irrigation, it is also being used for construction. It is also developing a 250-acre biodiversity park, because Gurgaon really does not have too much green around. It is giving clean, safe water via 10,000 households, because the biggest point in this entire thing is we use ozonation. Ozonation is a natural disinfectant, and also basically because we don't use fluorination, which is why we call ourselves 100% clean. And ozonation also kills the COVID virus by 80%, which is the new problem now. So we're able to do all that and give you water potable enough for innumerable uses. The kind of energy savings, the zero sludge generation, and the 23.2 million tons of CO2 emissions a year are being saved if this was supposed to be a chemically run plant. And kind of we have done the organic compost also that comes out is also something that can be sold, and that also creates a revenue generating product. And it kind of substitute fertilizers where you can use this manure for farming possibilities. Next slide, please. That's it. So the company is called Absolute Water, and we are the country's first ever 100% water recovery and sewage treatment plants.
Thank you, Smita. Thank you for sharing an overview of this very interesting product of vermi filter tech, 100% green and organic. And I like the point on ozonization kills COVID by 80%, energy savings, zero sludge savings of CO2 emissions. All that sounds really great. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
And thank you, Shuchi, Farhad, Swati, Sandeep, and Smita once again. I'm sure they all left you behind with a deeper understanding of freshwater ecosystems, the contributions they provide, and multi-stakeholder and community-based approaches for their management. Of course, there are multiple socio-economic dimensions of freshwater, but that was a good dive into some specific case studies. We will now dive into financing solutions for scaling such interventions, since financing is a key constraint, especially as water is not a simple cash flow churning sector like clean energy or green transport. And we need to find, therefore, ways to incentivize private sector investments, like Namita said, towards freshwater restoration. So I think we're running out of time, but thank you once again, all the panelists for this session. And I now hand over to Simran for commencing the second part of today's webinar. Thank you so much, and over to you, Simran.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kavita, and to all of the presenters. That was some very interesting case studies. And it was really great to hear about how these have been successful, how these are replicable interventions, and learning about integrating diverse ways of knowing, mimicking nature, and so on. I think in considering local or indigenous freshwater ecosystem restoration interventions, we're really facing the question that Swati has raised, which is this the future? Which I think might lead us very nicely into the panel discussion, where we will hear from finance and sustainability experts on some of these ideas. So I would now like to invite Namita to moderate our very exciting discussion. If I could please request all of the speakers to turn your video on, that would be great. And thank you very much. And with that, I hand it over to you, Namita. You have about 45 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was truly, I agree with Kavita. It was very interesting, participatory models, collaborative approaches, and localized solutions that are replicable. I think this is really great. So with that, we would move on to today's panel discussion. And we have some senior industry leaders who hold rich experience in water, finance, and climate action. The intent is to find ways to mitigate investment risks, address systemic challenges, create incentive structures, and ensure regular cash flows for freshwater projects following restoration, so that it builds the case to mobilize more finance, especially from the private sector. So I would very quickly introduce all our panelists here today. So we have with us Mr. Shankar Pandey, Director of Bankers Institute of Rural Development, Lucknow, which is the internationally acclaimed training institution in development banking field. And he is, the alumnus of the prestigious Indian Agriculture Research Institute, New Delhi. And he's also served with NABARD and its various institutions for more than 35 years, focusing on policy and financial reforms for the farm sector. So welcome to you, Mr. Pandey.
Thank you.
Along with him, we have Dr. Simon Langan, the Country Manager, Sri Lanka, and Director of Digital Innovations, International Water Management Institute, with a strong background in policy research and international capacity development. Simon's rich experience has been centered on the use of emerging digital innovations to influence policy, investments, and best practices in relation to water management. So welcome, Simon. Following him, we have Dr. Roshni Arora from the Nature Conservancy, who has more than 8 years of experience in freshwater science, hydroecology, data analysis, and modeling and conservation. At TNC India, Roshni works as an applied freshwater scientist and is currently leading and managing projects related to freshwater ecosystem conservation and planning. Welcome, Roshni. And we have Dr. Jor Burkham. He is the head of business development at Climate Fund Managers, that houses the pioneering partnership fund with the Dutch Development Bank, FMO, and other financial institutions. He particularly focuses on the wash sector, and he's also the president and the CEO of Arcova, an innovative advisory on water management, recovery, resource recovery, and green infrastructure. Jor's experience of over 30 years include local water and environmental management, international environmental negotiations, and water resources management. So I'm so excited to hear from all of you, and looking forward to how we curate this session into a fascinating discussion. So I will go with the first round of questions, and my first question is to you, Mr. Pandey. Agriculture is highly dependent on water, and in practice, agricultural decisions are water decisions, or vice versa. So in this context, how have regulatory interventions in the Indian agriculture sector addressed the subject of freshwater restoration, and how do you think these regulations have benefited the financing of such restoration?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, auctusESG 2030 Water Resource Group. Thanks for inviting Bert and of course, NABARD. We all belong to NABARD. I think India has a very adverse relationship with fresh water, with 17% global population and just 4% for global freshwater share. And we also have agriculture sector as a very large GDP contributing sector, growth contributing sector, with almost 60% population dependent on it. So we have to be extremely careful in using water. We have a lot of diversity in India. We have a number of states, and we also have a federal structure. And water typically is a state subject. The ownership of water is mostly lies with state government, that is provincial governments. But we have a beautiful federal and state structures which coexist and work together for water governance. So that's a good thing about India. And these are very old, well-evolved institutions. We have got institutions like Central Water Commission at the center, Central Groundwater Board, and we also have mirror images of these institutions in almost every state. A very comprehensive, water governance guideline or water regulations are available in India, which govern both surface water and groundwater, both forms of fresh water, and which clearly defines water flows, water ownership, water rights across states, between different institutions. There are guidelines for creating water infrastructure, which is very important. There are guidelines on groundwater extraction. There are tribunals, awards, and of course, there are courts which resolve any disputes, if any. So good governance structures, good technical parameters, the regulatory guidelines, governance structures, and arbitration, mechanism apparatus are available in India. There is very systematic way of clearing any project that relates to water. And that brings in the entire experience at the center, that is at the federal government level and the state level, in terms of designing technology, innovations, and best practices. So that goes with every new project that gets approved, whether at the state level or at the central level. Well, some of the regulations that have been in practice in India relate to how much groundwater should be exploited. And to facilitate very science-based decisions in this area, we have every block, which is a sub-district geographical unit in India, has been categorized with respect to its status of groundwater extraction. So we typically are, we want people who are into this business not to, create excessive structures in areas which are categorized as semi-critical and critical, status of their groundwater extraction. We also have nearly 16% of our blocks. We have around 850 blocks in India, which are already categorized as overexploited, and where any new groundwater extraction, water extraction structures are completely banned. We also have norms as to what should be the spacing between two wells which extract groundwater, so that we don't overpopulate given geography with a lot of extraction units. We, for every irrigation project, especially minor, major, and medium irrigation projects, we have approved cropping patterns. With respect to given water status of the particular area, we of course the agroclimate, the government chips in and they prescribe as to what cropping pattern should be followed once the area starts getting irrigation water. For any project that is based on surface water, we also have, 3 levels of design approval for any project. That is, one is at project level, whosoever are the project designers there. Then there are state regulators who approve the design, and it also goes to the central government for further approval. So expertise and thinking and policies and regulatory prescriptions at all levels are applied here. And of course, there is also a thing called state allocation of water, where a lot of legality is there, and that also is looked into before. Then every project has to get water permission from the respective authorities. So this is how we govern. And of course, once the project is created, before the project is created, it is clearly stated how this water, that the infrastructure that is built for X amount of water, how that water is going to be used. That is clearly allocated between different, claimants, sectors like agriculture, human use, urban use, drinking water, industrial use, and so on. Well, amid this, whereas all regulations cannot be 100% followed at all times, there are certain leakages, no doubt about it. But from our experience in NABARD, because BIRD is a part of NABARD, which is a largest, development finance institution and very specialized one of its kind in the world. We also fund a lot of irrigation projects and water structures. So we observe very, very clear shift in thinking of both the federal government as well as state governments, and all those people who are involved in designing of irrigation projects. So there is very clear shift. Like we used to have open canal system for larger projects, which is clearly giving way to more modern, more efficient, more cost effective, and also time effective piped water conveyance system. Earlier, typically, canal irrigation systems used to take a lot of land area to build canal. Diverse farmers of their small lands to build canal, and families would be, will have to migrate for alternate livelihood. That is no longer required. Then even there are seepages which spoils, surrounding area of big canals. So even that is avoided. And pipe water gives very good water use efficiency because conveyance is almost 100% from the lifting point to the starting point to the end point, which is close to just 60 to 70% in open canals. So this is a huge shift happening in all new modern irrigation projects that are being designed in India. Then these projects, which are typically canal projects, but now through pipe conveyance, are being specially designed to suit, micro irrigation at the tail end, at the farmer end. Like water will go through pipes up to the field of the farmer, but it is so designed, and through pressured, pipe water conveyance, that farmers are able to attach their own micro irrigation system and sprinkler system or any other precision, water system to this system, so they are compatible to micro irrigation. And this also, is a good model for private, for public-private partnership in, managing water, because the bulk part of the water is dealt with by governments through public finance. And at the tail end, when it comes to irrigating farms of individual farmers, the system is so designed that he or she can install their own, micro irrigation system, and that is how the the concept is well designed. One more shift is happening, which was, leading to very unscientific use of water in India, was that it most of the pump sets were electrified, but actual electricity supply would be very erratic, typically because urban areas, townships, and non-agricultural users would demand more electricity during daytime. So farmers would never get electricity during daytime, and therefore that would be available only during nighttime. So what they would do is they would just open up their pumps and allow water to flow down their fields, whether it is required or not, but just because electricity is available. So that is getting very fast changed across states because we are encouraging solar pumps. So solar pumps allow almost free electricity to farmer and available during daytime. So he would extract water only when it is required, and that flow, unnecessary flooding is not required. Well, coming to financing, because I already said that water basically is owned by state to the central or various state governments. The funding pattern today also is mostly, if you take, proportion, 90% it is funding to, state government, or it is public finance subject, and very little is into private finance right now. Nevertheless, we from NABARD, we have been encouraging models. We have at NABARD, we have mechanism to fund both, public finances for irrigation or water conservation, as also creating, more efficient localized structures which harness local freshwater resources or conserve, local freshwater resources. So typically all major, medium, and minor water irrigation structures and infrastructure would be created by state governments and the central government. And NABARD is one of the, whereas a lot of money comes from their own budget, but increasingly state and central governments are depending on NABARD finances for funding these activities. But uh, at the private end, also, I think some up to 2 decades back, we made heavy investments into lift irrigation projects, where very small lift irrigation would be created at a village level or cluster of village level, which are owned by cooperatives, or creating individual wells, whether it is dug well or tube wells, the micro irrigation system, and solar pumping system. So these are the forms of private, funding. And we at NABARD provide refinance at very concessional rate to all banks in India for funding these private structures. And we have very specialized mechanisms for funding all public, investment in irrigation sector. Our government also comes their schemes also come very handy. They have got to, infuse private, to encourage private investment in irrigation, infrastructure. Government has been giving grants or subsidy to individual farmers or the cooperatives, uh, or to those who are using micro irrigation structures, and that is supplemented by bank loans. And then bank loans are refinanced by NABARD. So there is a beautiful structure which exists there. NABARD helps in all kinds of technical and financial appraisal of all these projects, and also makes finance available. Well,
Great. Yeah. So thanks a lot. I think this was very, very informative, and
yeah.
I think the fact that you reiterated that regulatory, very strong governance structures and concessional financing that is available, that I'm sure will bring in more private sector participation into the fold. And I'll come back to you, Mr. Pandey, but I want to go to Simon next. Simon, Mr. Pandey mentioned that there are projects that are being done where there is an emphasis on designing, technology, innovations, and execution. So digital technology is driving significant changes in just about every sector, and in many schools of thought, stressing on the future of water that is going to be digital. So how, in your opinion, can these technologies be deployed to reduce the risk perception and promote the financing of freshwater restoration? So over to you, Simon.
Namita, thank you. Thank you very much. And just before I answer that, I will be brief. I'll keep to my 2 or 3 minutes. I just want to go back to your opening remarks about freshwater restoration. And I think it's important that everybody in the meeting understands what we're talking about when we talk about freshwater restoration. And I would just like to address that and say it is in the broadest sense. Fresh water is about supporting both social systems and ecological systems. And that word systems, thinking about rain, thinking about that rain vegetation, that vegetation soils into rivers, groundwaters, and lakes. And then what does society and indeed the environment need to utilize and keep those in good sustainable order? So then restoration for me, in its widest sense, is really supporting environment and society, both in terms of quality and quantity. So when we talk about restoration, I really think we're trying to reduce water scarcity. We're trying to improve efficiency and improve equity. And I think the approach to freshwater restoration is about a needs-based approach. It's not a blanket, it's not a tailored. It is about equity and it is about sustainability. And I think in all of those, then digital has a digital approach has a lot to play. So let me move straight into your questions to me, and hopefully useful for the group to think about. And I just will, again, very briefly, tackle those around 3 specific areas: risks, digital technology, and funding models. So I think in all of these, digital technologies can help talk about risk and the perception of risk. How effective are investments? What is the quantification of impact? How can digital technologies help us that? The costs and the benefit. How can they tackle perceptions and concerns about unattractive, sustainable growth potential? And opening up the opaqueness of results and delivery. And so I think against that backdrop, then digital technologies really enable communication of impact. So you can think about digital dashboards. Digital technologies become cheaper and cheaper. They allow live tracking of development through the Internet of Things and devices. So you can think about improved irrigation, real-time irrigation scheduling, and you can think about providing data. I think you can think about the role of digital technologies in monitoring of freshwater restoration through, for example, geographic information systems. Digital technologies are being used for simple and unbureaucratic deployment of capital through digital investment platforms. You can think, as we all use our mobile phones, all of that data that's being collected and information, and that allowing you to do big data analysis was what I was trying to say. Yes, thank you. And thinking about the system's impact. And then obviously the use of mathematical and computer modeling and thinking about what the future risks are against changing scenarios. What is climate change doing? What is this growth of population for 7 billion to 9 billion and against growing economics? And in terms of transparency, you can think about the use of value chain and blockchain technology and how that helps. The final element is, I would say there are a number of emerging funding models and financial mechanisms for water projects that could increase the uptake of both nature-based solutions, such as blended finance approaches, such as the Philippines revolving water fund, green bonds, the climate bonds, the water funds such as Nairobi, and climate finance. And finally, I would say that the transaction costs of these are heavily reduced through digitalization of the investment value chain, so deal structuring, sourcing of investors, contracting, investment tracking. So Namita, I know we're short of time, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Simon. I think that was interesting. Reduced transactional costs. That's very, very important aspect when it comes to financing. And my next question is to Roshni. Roshni, despite being tested and handed down through several generations, traditional ecological indigenous knowledge hardly finds its place in natural resource management. What are some of the solutions that you think to overcome the cultural and institutional barriers towards the incorporation of local and indigenous knowledge in freshwater management? Over to you, Roshni.
Thank you for the question. And before I delve into the question, I'd like to thank all of you for inviting me as a panelist. I'm sort of an outlier here, not an industry expert at all, but I'll do my best to answer the questions. Where you asked about indigenous knowledge and incorporating that seamlessly into the freshwater management process. I think that I will actually defer the answer actually to our participants or presenters that presented some wonderful presentations in the beginning of the part A of this webinar. And I think they sort of gave some answers through their case studies quite well. For instance, the common thing across all presentations, if you must have observed, was that all of them, they tried to foster relationship building between different types of stakeholders, including the local groups, the scientists, the managers, basically co-owning the process and co-thinking through the process and co-developing projects and interventions in the management plan. So building that, we here as scientists and managers think we are all on the desktops and writing fancy reports and all that. But I think the real work happens on the ground. It's about going to the ground, seeing the situation, talking to the people, and not undermining what they know. They know the land best. They have been working through their hands, through their feet, through decades. They have a very good understanding of what's going on in the local area. And that indigenous knowledge should be not extracted is not the right term, but at least like incorporated in our thinking process and sort of combined with the scientific knowledge. So it should be not like we are going there to do capacity building, but also we are also doing our own capacity building through what they've been doing and they can do. So I think that was one of the common themes across all the work that was presented in the beginning. Also, I think another thing would be to also sort of get a better understanding of the indigenous or the local hydrological knowledge as well. Like I said, we keep churning out scientific data and scientific knowledge on hydrological processes, ecological processes, how freshwater ecosystems work. But local communities as well have their own knowledge of the local area, and that should be also incorporated, perhaps in a systematic manner that is accepted by all sections, all levels of freshwater management. The third could be that, like I said, involving the communities through all stages of freshwater management from the beginning itself, not delaying that to the later stages of planning, but from the beginning. I mean, perhaps from the starting of the proposal writing, for instance, if you're writing a proposal for doing a freshwater management project in an area, starting from, involving them in the development of the proposal itself would be sort of a process in co-owning and sort of trying to break through those barriers. And also, one of the key things that the other presenters also highlighted and had included in the case studies was the inclusion of local champions and local community leaders. So, for instance, what she talked about, the Bujal Jankars, having local knowledge keepers, or the women self-help groups. So it's basically sort of assigning responsibility and ownership to those leaders from the community itself, so that they could also seamlessly interact with their people and sort of convey their knowledge in a seamless manner to the other sections of the freshwater management process. So I think a lot of organizations already recognize that and have been working on that for the past many decades, including WTR, as they've also exemplified through the case studies. And it's about, I think, scaling up those processes, it's scaling up that approach at a much wider scale, even probably including them in webinars like this, for instance, could be another way to break those cultural and institutional values and not just, limiting ourselves to just the experts or something like that. So yeah, I hope I kept myself brief.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I think, co-thinking and co-development of processes and not undermining the local knowledge that is sitting. I think that is indigenous knowledge. I think that's a very important point. And, how do you bundle science-based decision-making with hydrological indigenous knowledge? I think those are some of the key takeaways that I took from what you just said. And I would move on very quickly to Chur here. And Chur, I had a question from the audience also talking about, how freshwater restoration projects are mainly financed either through philanthropy, charity, or concessional finance. And then on the other side, there are various financial institutions with ambitions to finance water related projects, struggle with the pipeline. And that has been one of the biggest challenges for me also when I was a banker, full-fledged banker. So what has been in your experience, how have you addressed these challenges, especially in the context of the Climate Investor Fund, the second fund that you've launched as a part of the consortium with FMO? And how do you look at then directing this finance for ecosystem management or the water sector at large? Over to you, Chur.
Thank you, Namita. That is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Also, I think we have heard fantastic interventions by the other speakers presenting very interesting cases of the work done throughout India. I'm really pleased to have been able to listen to that. When it comes to the pipeline challenge, what we see is that there's either you have projects that are very interesting, but they're not really bankable. There is no real cash flow from the beginning thought into the design of the project. And we see that is one of the challenges that we face is, okay, well, how are we going to design those projects that actually do find cash flows when you talk about freshwater restoration? Then secondly, there are a lot of projects that actually are totally part of restoring freshwater. Like, for example, the building of wastewater treatment plants. We know that throughout India, but also in many other places, this is a massive operation for the coming 2 or 3 decades to actually build wastewater treatment plants or do something else with wastewater, but not letting it end up in the river. And we see increasingly that building wastewater treatment plants, but also working on collecting solid waste, particularly also then, of course, a large part of that is organic solid waste. If you combine that, there is a viable business case because you can generate energy with it. And there we see there is a huge opportunity to do parts of what is needed for freshwater restoration, but not necessarily thinking that this is about creating the next wetland that never will be able to pay. So wastewater, of course, you can have that paid by the users, like you pay the water, it's included in the water bill, or you have it paid by industrialists. But there are ways to actually get wastewater treatment paid, and there's a cash flow. Often what you then need, of course, is a proper PPP framework in country so that you actually can mobilize the private investments that are needed. And what we see is that while there might be capacity in treasury in countries to actually set up the PPPs, and there is some framework, what is often missing in the line ministries that you often have to work with is actually working through the whole PPP process and be part of that. And it's a lot of education on the road. It's not special workshops, it's actually doing it in the conversations, in the discussions, helping people to understand how to actually build a viable private investment. And then what we see, the third part is really looking at alternative ways of financing. And so we're working on, for example, debt for nature swaps that actually could mobilize financing for restoration without the restoration itself needing to generate the cash. So the cash is generated by the swap, but not by the ecosystem, which is different from, for example, saying, well, we're going to reduce sediments in the river, and so the intake of the water company won't be silted up every time, and the water company is happy to pay for that, for example, or not having its reservoir silted up, and is happy to invest upstream in riparian reforestation, for example, so the reservoir silting is not happening. That is much harder to finance because you actually need to have a proper monitoring and verification in place that actually can prove, yep, this is happening. The riparian zones are capturing the silt that is flowing into the rivers and then into the reservoir. I'm very happy to elaborate, of course, much longer on all the experiences. What we are currently doing is we have one fund, so this is all one fund, one sub-fund that finances the early stage development. It's called the Origination Facility. It's the DFCD Origination Facility, where we can provide grant financing to develop projects that then, of course, need to be bankable at a certain point. And then we can do follow-up financing, which is a reversible loan that we do from the Climate Investor 2 fund, which actually helps projects to get to financial close. So we very deliberately focus on that early stage of project development that is needed to actually get bankable projects in the sector that are not the mainstream. So the wastewater treatment plant I started with, that's easy, still challenging, but it's doable. Restoration projects, as we just discussed today, they're much harder to actually really get financing for.
Thank you. So what I hear you is, projects that have circularity and have the immediate cash flow opportunities. I think those are the ones that are attractive, and it's interesting to know about the fund. We are running a little late on our time, so if I could go on with the second questions, but I would request each of the panelists to make it in a couple of minutes to your answers. And I would ask Mr. Pandey a question where, while crop decisions in India are shaped by the local climate and natural resources, nowadays, water intensive crops are being cultivated across regions, leading to rapid water stress. And we saw how some of the earlier, presentations where they're solving this problem. So how do you think can crop decisions at the local level be influenced? I'm sure NABARD has been doing it. You just mentioned some part of it in your earlier discussion. And how can this be supported in order to reduce the farm sector's vulnerability to fresh water supply? Mr. Pandey, you're muted.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Before I answer your question, a quick information on because Mr. Simon spoke on grant-based funding. In fact, for fresh water, restoration, like Sandeep told his experiences, water is very close partner of NABARD. We have helped 700 projects on grant funding basis, and we have already restored something like 2.3 million hectare area of treated watersheds through this. Plus, we have two other mechanisms through which we are funding irrigation sector, and which is improving actually water efficiency, water use efficiency in India. So, and we have brought something like 3.4 million hectare of freshwater projects, and either these are renovations, we made them more efficient, and these are very interesting mechanism. One is in one mechanism, actually funds come to us as part of penalties imposed by central bank on banking system, which is we call priority sector lending shortfall. So that fund comes to us, and we fund state government projects under this. We have one more mechanism whereby we raise money from the market, and we fund all central and state government investments in all medium and major projects. These projects were languishing for so many years in the past. Well, this is regarding vulnerability. I think, crop choices are made because of ease of either growing those crops, because value chains in those crops are well established, or there are some commercial advantages where productivity is much more stabilized, prices are not fluctuating, or these crops are little more favored in terms of their marketability and procurement by government, or assured prices being offered. So now and the central theme of our thinking has to be how we can put more cash in the pocket of farmers. That is his concern. So therefore, I think we need to do a lot of one is some fiscal engineering for promoting alternate crops. See, the demand composition is already changing. It is no longer just wheat and rice that used to be demanded by ultimate end consumers. Market is expecting a lot of the supplies from farming community. So, but farming community is not really sure about if they switch over to those crops, whether they would stay, equally cash rich or not. And therefore, there needs to be fiscal mechanism to support farmers, at least initially, for about say 5 years till they stabilize, yields and returns in new crop that are being demanded. And therefore, we also need good amount of research in new crops, good amount of research in good amount of investment in value chain, maybe even the market development for new crops, and certain regulation for rationing of existing crops. Typically in India, sugarcane, wheat and paddy are three crops which take huge amount of water. So some amount of rationing in terms of how much one can grow, or how much these crops get procured by government, procurement services for public distribution system, or for creating national buffers, food grain buffers. So these are some of the measures on the user side. But on water management side, I think we need to if we can divert runoffs and flood water from excess rainfall areas to scarce areas. I think both problems are solved. One is devastation due to floods, and other problem that is where we don't have much precipitation. Those areas also get water for agriculture and other uses. And these projects have been very nicely demonstrated in India, and typically in Gujarat, where Kutch area has been completely irrigated from flood water from elsewhere in Gujarat, and NABARD has been one of the funding agencies for that. It's a very interesting project, which actually fills something like 117 dams along its way of 550 kilometers, and water from flood areas are diverted there. So this is because India is a large country, and we also need large solutions. Otherwise, I think in situ harvesting of water and managing water well within the watershed, which we have we have been already doing. In fact, more important would be can we start measuring water? There is no mechanism, and that is where I think I would support all technological, whether it is digital or whatever technology. We must bring a lot of technology into water sector so that we start measuring. Nobody knows how much water he or she are using, either in field or in households or in urban sectors. And of course, when we start measuring water, that is when we can start pricing water also, and that is where we can start monetizing, water related projects. I think and we have wonderful experiences in monetizing public assets as well. Like most of the national highways in India and even the state-owned highways in India are monetized and very successfully monetized. Very recently, a few monetized highways have been freed now, and no longer road toll will be collected in this on these roads. I think it is quite possible that both urban water and in some commercial agriculture areas, even irrigation water, if science is brought into and there is good, public investment in bulk water sector and private investment in retail water sector, I think it is possible to bring in commercial angle to water at micro level as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. I think this is very interesting. Rationing of certain crops, I think that was a very interesting point, and measurement, what gets measured gets managed. So I think that's a very important point. And you did address technology. So my question is to Simon. And Simon, I want you to very quickly respond to this. We're seeing that emerging technologies are in the urban setting are very common, and we use them regularly. And how do you think these technologies can be used in the context of local and indigenous knowledge in rural settings? Because that is also the theme of this particular webinar. And this is particularly to scale up efforts for freshwater ecosystem restoration.
Thank you. Let me give you a few examples. And the first one I would say is some work that we've done in India and Bangladesh. And that is the IMI South Asia Drought Monitoring Scheme. And I think that's really important. So that provides real-time data and information to farmers, to rural communities of when they're likely to be flooded or when they're allowed to suffer a drought. And then we've advanced that and been working with insurance companies now to provide insurance. So looking at that level of risk. And again, using high resolution, spatial high resolution, and highly resolved temporal resolution data. So where there is this lack of ground data, we can use remote sensing data. And that has given access to insurance products that farmers have never had before. And then the third element, building on that to the next level, is when farmers have had to claim insurance to try and help their livelihoods, we've gone in towards bundled solutions. So from the insurance, not only the insurance paying out, but then giving them seeds within the same season so that they can replant those ideas. The third one I would give you is, again, some software that we've developed, which we call SAMS, which is Systematic Asset Management Software for Irrigators. So one of the problems is there is no standard asset management scheme for irrigation. And so you don't know what assets are performing, what the productivity is of different formalized irrigation schemes. So again, we've developed that and we're testing that in India and in Bangladesh and here in Sri Lanka. So yeah, asset management in terms of water management is very important. Thank you.
Thanks. I think, real-time data is truly empowering, and bundling that with technology would take it to the next level. So Roshni, if you could very briefly, touch upon the next question that I'm going to, answer the next question that I'm going to ask you. And that is about, the private finance is required to scale restoration initiatives. I don't think there's enough capital out there. So what do you think have been some of the innovative financial instruments, especially where private finance has been leveraged? So any examples that you could cite, and share with us around the freshwater restoration projects?
Sure. Before I go into the private finance mechanisms or solutions, I would just want to highlight that TNC utilizes financial and a governance mechanism or a model called water funds, which is sort of pioneered by TNC since the early 2000s, wherein it basically brings together different stakeholders from the public, private, and civil society to make collective action around water security and watershed conservation and restoration. And it is within this larger structure of a water fund that different financial solutions, both public and private, are implemented and utilized to facilitate and create a self-sustaining mechanism, financial mechanism to sort of sustain watershed conservation and restoration activities. Some of them also can last up to 80 years. So within water funds, again, I mean, which financial solution to use, it is a complex question, and it's region specific, context specific, and sort of it requires answering a set of questions around what conservation social outcomes you want to use, and what enabling conditions are there, what options are available, what is the level of risk the investors are wanting to carry. But like I said, so in several cases, we either use public or private or a combination of both solutions. But when it comes to specifically to the private financial mechanisms, some examples of what we have used within the context of water funds are things like impact investments. So impact investments are investments that are made in projects or companies or organizations to manage the funds with the intention of generating measurable environmental and social impact, which sort of have a financial return. So basically, within that, we have a water fund called as the Sustainable Impact Water Fund, within which the Renewable Resource Energy Group and the Nature Conservancy, they collaborated to co-design a conservation framework wherein they invested land and water assets to improve management of fresh waters. So they basically, within that fund, they purchase agricultural or water assets that are not being managed at a highest possible value. They improve the management of those and generate the highest possible value, and then return either from the sale of the assets or from the operation of assets, or both. Some other examples are like endowments, basically within which the large water users in the area, such as municipal water authorities or brewers or sugarcane growers, they make voluntary investments into a central fund. And once that is fully capitalized, then the earnings are directed towards conservation activities upstream. Another example is revenue sharing, within which distribution of both the profits and losses is done between stakeholders of the water fund. And there is an example of the Latin America Water Fund. It is basically a large partnership that has now set up about 26 water funds in Latin America, wherein they have used these private financial solutions such as endowments and revenue sharing and things like that. So I think I'll stop there. So that sort of gives you an idea of what water funds and what private solutions are being used within the water funds for freshwater restoration.
Yes, thanks. I think collective financial solutions and various instruments, I think that's the balance that's to be brought about. Mr. Jor, my final question is to you. And you did mention about uncertainties in revenues, the bankability of projects, and at times also political interferences in maybe developing markets. So how do you see financiers going forward tapping into this opportunity and increase their capacity to raise the funds? Because ultimately there's a huge opportunity that is facing us, and this needs to be tapped. So what are your last thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, and I think, as I said earlier today already, the key is that there's a proper PPP framework in place that allows, because we know that a lot of those investments are de facto in public infrastructure. So you need some form of arrangement if you want to do these investments at scale, and they're there. In India, they are happening. It's not like it's not like they're not happening. They're happening at scale in massive programs. For example, on the wastewater side, And I think some of the financial models that are used and actually originated in in India are quite interesting in the sense that developers can get their principal relatively quickly paid back relatively quickly, so the investors don't lose their principal and only have a risk on the profit side, on the upside of the investment. And so that for many investors, that's critical. We do something similar with some of our financing, is that we have a blended finance fund. And so what we do, we bring in concessional money and private investments that have a guarantee. For example, from a concessional financing institution. And with that, we basically can both provide impact that are more sought after by the concessional financing institutions, but also provide, and they get lower returns. But then we can also provide the kinds of returns that private investors want to have, and that that are maybe less interested in the depth of the impact, but really want to see some of the returns. Most of the investors, however, that we are mobilizing are also interested in the impact, but they don't want to sort of give up a lot on the return side to actually have impact. And that's a bit of our philosophy. When we mix it, you actually can develop projects and finance them that both deliver impact and deliver returns to some of the private investors. Some of those private investors, like larger pension funds, because if you talk about big capitals, that's one of the sources where these sort of funds are. They're just limited of how much risk they are allowed to take. They might individually want to take it, but they're not allowed by the regulations. They're not allowed to take the risk. So therefore, you need to put a guarantee on it, so that basically it's almost impossible for them to lose the principal. And if they don't have too high returns, that's even that. But they still have a reasonable return that they can associate with the emerging market. So it's only when we can make those that part of the fund a AAA, then we can get the sort of larger pension funds to be investing in that part of the fund. And then what we do is blending. We basically use all these monies and invest in a similar proportion in each project. And so you have different instruments within a project. So some of it is equity, some of it is quasi-equity, and some of it can be shareholder loans. So it depends a bit of how we have organized, but mostly that's a bit of a mix of instruments that finally end up in a project. What I would also say is that what we see often in these projects is that for this you need cooperation between financing institutions, because we can't do it alone, and I think very few can do it alone. So we work very closely with a number of institutions on the concessional side that provide those guarantees. But often you also need at government level within country, you need close cooperation, of course, with Treasury, and looking for the forms of guarantees that actually can be provided by government. And that's where often quite a few of the projects, particularly in more difficult countries, sort of strand, because on the one hand, you would need a guarantee to actually get private investors from the government to get private investors in. But on the other hand, there, for example, the IMF doesn't allow a country to actually give more guarantees out. So it's just like, well, we need guarantees, but we are not allowed to give guarantees, or our window of guarantees that we still have, well, we're going to use that to build a hospital with this private investor and not a water supply project. So there's, in discussion with Treasury, we're also always navigating, okay, well, how can we formulate this in a way we can have the guarantee, and if it's not a financial guarantee, there's still other guarantees, but it finally comes down to allocating the risk in a project to where the risk belongs. And that's what private investors want to see. It's like, well, government, for example, expropriation, well, that's government, you have to take that risk. You cannot ask the private sector to take that risk. But the commercial risk, yeah, a certain commercial risk, that's the private sector should be taking that risk.
Yes.
So that's
Okay.
a bit of,
Yeah.
and we're very happy to talk
Thanks.
more about our
Yeah.
experiences, of course, but that's some glimpse of an insight of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, you've made some very relevant points. And in fact, the hybrid annuity model in India is, quite successful with wastewater treatment, especially under the Namami Gange project. And that's a big replicable model and it's done very well. I was involved a while ago in that model. So it's quite demonstratable. But I think we have to close this very interesting session. And I must thank, all the panelists here, Mr. Pandey, Simon, Roshni, and Jer. Your insights have truly been valuable, and I'm sure that this has, kicked off, so triggered certain thoughts on how finance can be scaled around, freshwater ecosystem restoration and around these aspects where the capital is not flowing. I think that is the most important thing. So thank you very much. I think this was very, very interesting for me personally, and I'm sure all our audience has also enjoyed it. So I would now hand over to Sim to close the session finally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Namita, and to all of our panelists. So we are, approaching the end of this webinar. So I'd like to thank all the participants who've stayed with us, all the panelists, all the presenters. This conversation has been fascinating and has provided a lot of food for thought for everybody. Can I very quickly request that everyone turn their video on for a very quick picture? That would be lovely. My colleagues are just taking screenshots of their screens right now. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to thank our partner, 2030 WRG, and All4ClimateItaly 2021 for providing the platform for this event. To continue this conversation on freshwater ecosystems and scaling, interventions that are underpinned by local and indigenous knowledge. To take this conversation forward, please reach out to us on our social media or the website that you see in front of you. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a lovely day ahead.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.